Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this morning's PES Network webinar on new forms of support to employers. We have an hour and a half in front of us to discuss this interesting topic. My name's Ed Thorpe, and I'm part of the support team behind the PES Network, and I'll be moderating today's discussion, where we're going to be looking to stimulate a discussion really between you involving both PES and other labour market stakeholders on the state of play and development of PES services to employers. And I think it's fair to say that for many people, particularly that don't work inside a PES, they still think of public employment services primarily as just looking at supporting job seekers. And that doesn't reflect the reality. That's obviously an important dimension. And a lot of PES Network efforts are devoted to those topics about how PES support job seekers directly. But working with employers is increasingly recognised as being a key area of work, and it's important in helping public employment services with their recruitment assistance, supporting job seekers. It's important for understanding the labour market and emerging skills needs that there are out there in the labour market, and what kind of training and pathways people need to be thinking about, and education and training establishments need to be thinking about. And so hopefully today is going to be a really exciting opportunity for those of you that already know why the services support to employers are so important, to hear a bit more about specific practices. And I'll explain a little bit later who the practices that we're hearing from. But we've got three main examples being presented from Austria, Slovenia, and Sweden. So we look forward to hearing that inspiration, to dig into the inspiration behind what they're doing in terms of their work with employers. But maybe for some of you, if you're not so aware of what PES are doing with employers, this can be an introduction also to understand the range of services that are being provided by PES, and to understand the context a little bit better. And we'll also, towards the end of today's webinar, be hearing the employer's perspective. A representative of Business Europe will be joining us to give some reflections on how they see it from their side. Before I go into the rules of engagement and how you can engage with today's speakers today, I'd just like to pass the floor to Elodie Fazi, who is the head of unit at the PES Network Secretariat in DG Employment, to give us perhaps a little bit more of the context, Elodie, for today's webinar and the work of the network. Thank you very much. Elodie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning to all. So I'm the head of the Secretariat of the PES Network. And really, we're very, very pleased to welcome you on this webinar today. We're all happy to see many participants from the PES Network, but also other partners. I think it's really an opportunity to reach out a bit beyond, and we're very pleased to see so many of you today. As you know, the strategy of the PES Network puts a very strong emphasis on partnership in the labour market ecosystem. And over the last years, the network really has increasingly encouraged PES to redesign their services to employers. And I think we can fairly say this is really important to meet changing needs, and this has even accelerated in the last years. We could see it, for example, in the annual conference we had in April on the topic of labour and skills shortages, and many of you were there already. This implies, for example, a shift towards more skills profiling, identifying skills that are transferable, for example. But we also see that the service delivery of PES to employers needs to be adapted to the green transition and to a diversity of job seekers. So in all this, we've also seen that there's a particular challenge, which is to reach out to employers that maybe are a bit less likely to contact PES. And I'm thinking, for example, of SMEs. So at the same time, talk about challenges, but there's also lots of new opportunities which are opened, for example, by digitalization. So these are only some of the issues we'll be discussing today, and we really are here to learn from each other, to hear from inspiring and innovative practices. For those of you who maybe are a bit less familiar with the PES Network, we are a very active community. We have a broad work program with about 20 activities every year. And this year we'll be focusing in particular on topics like the green, the digital transition, but also, unfortunately, very important priorities over the last months have been to help PES work together in supporting persons displaced from Ukraine. And maybe this is also a topic somehow we can discuss today, to what extent actually engagement with employers is really helpful on this challenge. So if you want to find out more, I can only invite you to go and have a look at the Knowledge Center of the PES Network and the repository of practices. We will post a link in the chat. You can find lots of different materials. And since last year, we've also produced some podcasts that have really given a voice to practitioners from across the EU and the challenges that you are facing. So I think I will stop here. We're really here to hear from you. And I would really like to thank again our speakers for today. And I will hand over to Ed, our moderator, for the next steps. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you very much indeed, Elodie. So we're making good time, which is a good start to today's webinar. We can perhaps start the presentations early. Just to kind of remind then about the rules of engagement. It's only the panelists, the people that you can hopefully already see on your screen, that we're going to be kind of hearing from. We're going to be hearing 3 inspirational practices. Sorry about that. Telephone ring. We'll be hearing 3 inspirational practices and a small intervention also from the German PES a little bit later. But what we want from you as participants is to ask your questions in the Q&A. So don't be shy about that. You'll see that the chat down below is already quite active, and we encourage you to use the chat to react, to say hello to each other. That's great. But if you want to ask a question, please don't use the chat. Please use the Q&A box, which you should see just to the left of the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully, that's what I'll be monitoring as we progress through today's discussions and picking up questions from there to ask to our different presenters. You might want to ask a question to one specific presenter about their practice, so please just make that clear in your question. Or you may want to ask a question, the same question to everybody. You can do either. Just please make it as clear as possible when you post your question, whether it's to one of the presenters or several. So I won't be monitoring the chat. I'll encourage, if other people, I'll ask Elodie, if she sees someone post a question in the chat, I'll encourage them to move it across the Q&A. So to give you a bit of a flavour of the diversity of the PES practices that we're going to be hearing from today, we're going to be hearing a practice from the PES in Austria called AMS Pit Stop. Well, that's the translated version, AMS Box and Stop. And that's about using telephone conferences and virtual meetings to keep in touch with businesses to offer them the most suitable services. We're going to be hearing from Slovenia, the PES in Slovenia, about a one-stop shop, offices for employers and the advantages that has brought. And from Sweden, the Swedish PES, we're going to be hearing about speed interviews, which sounds quite an interesting concept, I suppose, based on the speed dating concepts that perhaps some of us know about. And then, as I say, we'll have an additional short, not quite a presentation, but a few words from the German PES about their approach to account management. So that's a little bonus intervention there on our agenda for today. So you can post your questions in the Q&A box at any time. I think we'll go through the 3 presentations first and come to the questions at the end, but don't wait until the end to start posting your questions. As soon as you get inspired or have something you want to ask, post it in the Q&A. If someone else has already asked the question that you want to see answered, you can upvote it, I think, in the Q&A box. Please do that, because we might not have time to take all the questions. So to please sort of express your support for the questions that you particularly want answered. Okay, so that said, I think we're still 5 minutes ahead, but let's make a start with our first presentation. Each presenter is going to have 10 minutes. Just to warn presenters, after about 9 minutes, I'll just give you a kind of a 1-minute warning so that you know that time is running out. I don't want to have to cut you off, so I'll give you a little bit of leeway, but not too much, because we do want to get to the questions from our participants today. So the first presentation is from Austria. We have 2 people from the Austrian PES, Sigrid Dobritz and Katharina Oberbichler, who I think are there sitting together. I can see you both together on the screen. So Sigrid is in the Department Service for Employers at AMS, which is the Austrian PES, and Katharina, the quality management, on the quality management side at AMS. So you're going to be doing a joint presentation on AMS Box and Stop, which I believe means pit stop. So we look forward to hearing all about that, and the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, Ed. Hello, everybody, and good morning. We are very pleased to introduce our touchpoint IMS Boxenstopp today. It will be the two of us, as Ed already said, Katharina Oberbichler and myself, Sigrid Dobitz, to jointly present. And I will now share our screen and will hand over to Katharina for her opening words.
Also from my side, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences with you. We are just waiting for the slides to open, and now you should see them. Is that right?
Yes, they're not. It's not full screen yet. If you can.
It is not full screen yet.
We can still see on the left-hand side the other slides. It needs to be in presentation mode.
That's interesting because we don't. We have. Hang on, just a moment. Is it better now?
No, I can't see it at all, man.
Should we? Okay, I tried again. Okay. So, how is it now?
No, it's still. We can still see the other slides on the side.
Okay, I think I cannot change that right now because
okay, we'll present it from our side.
Yes, that would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Give us 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. So our talk is about, as you already mentioned, the IMS pit stop, our IMS box and stop. And when you would please go to the next slide. So during the last 2 years in Austria, we had 4 lockdowns because of the COVID crisis. And in this time, many industry sectors completely shut down. And we were also facing a tremendous increase of unemployment rates from about 300,000 to more than 500,000 in April 2020. So one of our 3 core processes is the service for employers. And in this service, we set a strategy, and this strategy was to foster the position as a reliable partner to our customers, the companies. And it was on the one side to support our employers actively in difficult times, and second, to move on, to go on, and to keep on providing our services by adapting them to the new circumstances and to the new needs of our customers. And my colleague Sigrid will now tell you how we implemented this strategy.
Can you please move to the next slide, please? Okay, I would like to pick up the underlying strategy and will continue with the genesis of the IMS Boxenstopp. I would like to recall the situation we had in March 2020 when employers had to reduce their personal costs at short notice, but had at the same time to keep an eye to retain their employees. So here the short-time work scheme helped a lot. Secondly, we developed our distance counseling format IMS Boxenstopp, and we also developed our premium service organization Impulse Consulting on Demand to meet the current challenges and the issues in the labor market of our employers. But we would like to focus in our presentation now on the IMS Boxenstopp, and I would like to ask to move to the next slide, please. What it is about, it is a planned, prepared, and structured exchange with employers. It takes about 20 minutes. It can be conducted via phone or virtual meeting. It has 3 overall goals. The first one and foremost, it is to keep contact with the enterprises during physical distancing. This was very important for us. As Katharina already said, we had 4 lockdowns the last 2 years, and we would like to share with you that we were very successful with this later on with some facts and figures. Secondly, it is our goal to listen to enterprises, how they are doing, and to learn the challenges and needs. Last but not least, it is important for us to figure out which appropriate service could serve the most. Okay, can we please move on to the next slide? I've mentioned before that we follow a certain structure within the AMS Boxenstopp. So when it comes to key elements, I can say the preparatory work is, of course, very important. It is about checking client history, checking the knowledge of the industry sector, considering upfront what could be questions that could be asked, and so on. When it comes then to the execution of the Boxenstopp, it is active listening is important, and of course a conscious communication, because as I said before, we want to find out what would be the most suitable services right now for the employers. After the Boxenstopp, we are sending a wrap-up email to summarize the outcome. All right. As it comes to the additional value, in the sense of looking at the given time frame we have, I would like to name the big advantage of our AMS Boxenstopp. It is that it is location independent. So it means that we are independent of any health policy restriction. Furthermore, we achieved that the Boxenstopps carried out at a very high level, standardized high level, and this was possible as this is a tailor-made method, and it is well trained. Would you please move to the next slide, please? Okay. After setting the scene, I would like to keep the speech and say the wind has changed. And what this means, the wind has changed, I can say that the topics prevailing in AMS Boxenstopp has changed. So to make it a little bit clearer, what is the current situation in Austria? We have a constantly decreasing unemployment rate, but at the same time, we are facing an all-time high of open vacancies. Currently, it is more than 138,000 immediately available open vacancies. To give you a comparison, in the year 2019, we had a record of 90,000 open vacancies, so that makes already quite a difference. Next to this, labor shortages. Oh, sorry, there's one more sentence, please. Next to labor shortages, and next to labor shortages, also skills shortages are prevailing our current labor market situation. Okay, now we can move to the next slide. Thank you. We brought some questions which are examples some questions that could be most likely raised now during an AMS Boxenstopp, and I have to admit some of the questions are really complex. So, for example, it is getting more and more difficult to find employees. What can be done? Or another example is how to keep newly hired employees on board. So next slide, please. Okay, now we come to answers, and I will only pick 2 as we are a little bit limited in time. What do we do? To provide transparency and visibility in the labor market, we have launched a job search engine called Alle Jobs, in English, All Jobs. And what is so special about this job search engine? It covers all open vacancies noticed to us, all vacancies from our self-service internet platform, eJobRoom, job advertisements from the internet, from the public sector, and selected job ads from the German Federal Employment Agency. Of course, you can find all these jobs also in our job app. And I do not want to forget the job of the day, which is a hand-picked vacancy, which we post every day with a lovely and well-thought text. And finally, I would like to emphasize two more topics. It is employer branding and onboarding. And if it should come during an AMS Boxenstopp, that it turns out that an employer would like to deepen this topic, we can offer a organizational impulse consulting on demand. Katharina, may you take over?
Next slide, please, Ed. Okay, now I want to show you the results that we could achieve with our AMS Boxenstopp. As you can see on this, to recall, it was not possible to visit companies. And our aim was to keep in contact with the companies and to continue providing our services. And as you can see in this diagram, the blue line illustrates the decrease of our on-site visits that we usually pay to our customers, the companies, on a regular basis. And in the first lockdown, this service immediately went down to 0. So in the first weeks, we tried to set up this new format of the AMS Boxenstopp, and we implemented it. And there was a pilot in June. You can see it is starting, the red line increasing. And from August, we really, that the service was in place. And you can also see that we were reaching peaks during the periods of the lockdowns. They are here in the slide, lockdown 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in the first lockdown, our service went down. We did not keep in contact. But then in the second, third, and fourth lockdown, we were able to stay in contact, and the company wanted to have this service. It was well accepted by them. Altogether, the on-site visits that have been increasing again, and the Boxenstopp, we were able to continue our services as well in scope and also in quality standard on the same level as before the COVID crisis. You also see this blue peak in October 2021. This is our yearly campaign, the AMS Business Tour, where we visit a lot of companies, usually to gain new vacancies. But as Sigrid already mentioned, this year the topic was rather on strategies how to find and keep workers. So as you can see in the last months from the diagram, that both channels of the service have been appreciated and accepted both by our staff and also by our customers. Next slide, please.
Just a couple of minutes, if that's okay. I don't want to rush you, but...
Okay, we will be finished shortly. So just one sentence here. This is our advertisement of our campaign, this business tour, also branding our strategy. Together, it is easier to move forward. Next slide. In autumn, we plan to conduct a survey on the satisfaction of our customer with the AMS Boxenstopp. So far, we only have gathered some feedback from our staff. And what we hear from them, that they think that the Boxenstopp via telephone or also online is a very suitable alternative to the on-site visits. They also tell us that the Boxenstopp toolbox that we provide to them is well accepted. The toolbox provides an overview over our service portfolio and helps our staff to go through the consultancy process. Our staff also experiences that the customers appreciate the service provided online or via telephone. And in the last slide, when we move to the last slide, you can see our overall customer satisfaction. 4 times a year, we contact companies, And you can see the red line is illustrating the satisfaction of the employers, the companies, and the blue line illustrates the satisfaction of the job seekers with our service. We have been doing this client monitoring system since the early 1990s. Here you have the results from 2020. And we can see that the satisfaction has been increasing during the COVID crisis. And this is leaving us now with the challenge to keep up this level for the future. We thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to answer your questions later on.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much to you two for that excellent presentation. Really interesting to see, again, another example of how COVID and the crisis prompted this move to online services and the extent to which that can be then a lasting change, bringing benefits that will carry on. That once we get back to, fully back to normal, we're nearly at normal, but we're fully back. And I'm sure lots of people have questions for that, but we'll come to the questions later. Please do post those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll pick up on those later. If not, I've already got a couple that I would want to ask you, but hopefully participants will ask their own questions. So we'll go straight now to the example from the Slovenian PES, which is going to be talking to us about the offices for employers that they run, a kind of a one-stop shop. It'll be interesting to see how that compares to the example we've just heard from Austria. So we'll be handing the floor to Sandy Meka, the coordinator of services for employers at the PES in Slovenia, together with Žive Štiglich, the coordinator of the central office for employers. So again, you'll be, I believe, doing that together. I'm not sure that you're in the same room, but Žive, are you going first? I'll hand the floor to you. No? Is it Sandy going first? Okay, Sandy, the floor is yours. So together you have 10 minutes to present your example.
Again, it's really an honor to be invited to this event. Our presentation will not be about one single practice. It is actually a story about a system of services for employers we built in Slovenia in the last 10 years. But firstly, let me tell you more about our organization. Employment Service of Slovenia is a public employment service operating uniformly across our country. We have around 1,000 employees, and here you can see a list of our most important services, which are quite similar to those offered in other European countries. And I think we can all agree that employers are a really important customer, but do we really, provide and give them enough time, resources and effort, to support them? The unemployment level in Slovenia is low. It's well below the European average, but it has not always been like that. We have changed our approach to servicing employers 10 years ago. Why 10 years ago? We had a difficult situation in the labor market back then because of the negative effects of the global economic crisis. And we really wanted to focus more on employers. And this is the employer strategy we built back then. And it's quite simple and straightforward. We wanted to have one-stop shops for our employers. We wanted to diversify our services for employers and really tailor them to employers' needs. We wanted to strengthen cooperation with employer associations. And last but not least, we really wanted to upskill our employees to be able to service employers. And today, all over Slovenia, we have a network of offices for employers in all the large cities. They have their own branding. They help employers with the publication of job vacancies, with the job matching activities, with organizing career and recruitment events such as job fairs. And if there are no suitable workers available, they can train them in cooperation with employers and really tailor these trainings to employers' needs. What I want to say is that it was really important in the beginning to build up new services. It was really important to introduce new standards of employer services because employers are the first to notice if the service level is not on the same level of quality in one city. as it is in the other city, in the other part of the country. We also had to build new tools, such as a new customer relationship management program to support our colleagues in the field. So it was really important to have a good developmental support from our central office. So I will now give the floor to my colleague Živa Stiglitz, who coordinates the central office of employers, to elaborate a little bit on that.
Hello again. Yeah, in a very summarized manner, I would just like to show you how this actually takes place in practice. Okay, perfect. Yes, as already Sandy mentioned, within the one-stop shop approach, we are offering the whole spectrum of services to the employers. Now, let's take a look how this actually takes place in practice. Here on the first photos, you can see a group of services that I would like to call high-end recruitment services, if I may say so. For example, on the left photo, you can see a talent search event for a multinational company. And on the right photo, you can see an assessment taking place. So this would be like a group of these high-end recruitment services. Secondly, what I would like to point out in practice from the practical point of view is that we are all the time also trying to connect employers with those who are unable to enter the labor market on their own. So with the long-term unemployed, with the vulnerable groups. Here you can see how it takes place in practice. An example of 2 job shadowing events that we have organized lately and were really successful. And on top of that, I would also like to point out that we are really strengthening the advocacy at the Employment Service of Slovenia. And thirdly, we would not be able to offer all these services successfully if we wouldn't regularly visit the employers, because these regular visits make it possible to get to know the specific needs of the employers and their values and the environment of the employers that they actually have. And one last thing that we are working on the field is organizing recruitment events. Here on the right, you can see an example of a job fair. On top of that, we are also organizing virtual job fairs and speed dating events. So this is from the practical point of view, and I'm looking forward for your questions. And now back to Sandy.
Thank you, Živa. So obviously, you cannot provide such a wide spectrum of services without, a professional team behind it. So what we had to do was really upskill and raise the competencies of our counselors to be able to service employers. So we really need to provide additional trainings in, I will give you a few examples, in sales and negotiations, how to do a business interview, how to analyze an employer, how to do a selection procedure. We need to learn more about labor law and employment of foreign workers. We had to network with new organizations and really talk about all the issues in the labor market, whether it's green jobs, whether it's mental health, decent work, what are the new labor market trends. We talked about agile work methods. Why? Because employers don't need a robot to talk to. They don't need someone who just knows how to do one task. They want a holistic approach. They want someone who works together with them to help solve problems. So at first we thought this would be interesting just for SMEs, but that's not the case. It's also the larger employers that would like to have such a cooperation. And I would also like to emphasize that we had to build up cooperation with employer associations. We signed formal cooperation agreements with all representative employer associations, also with the Association of Employment Agencies, who are an important partner in the labor market. Every year we have meetings, we do make an annual action plan and really, take on difficult tasks such as new services, digitalization, providing new employment opportunities for vulnerable groups. We cooperate in projects, to name just a few topics. So where are we today? I'm glad to report that vacancies are on a record level. Employer satisfaction is very good. The majority of employers cooperate with us using digital services, and all labor market policy programs for employers are now digital only. And as we heard before with the Austrian example, employer events really, took up. They actually tripled in the first years of implementing the strategy. So I think Ed will soon warn me that my time is running out. So I will just say that we are on a path, on a new strategy path. So we will be focusing in the following years on providing new services for vulnerable groups, such as post-placement. We will be developing capabilities for more long-term predictions of competence needs in the labor market. We are, rapidly digitalizing our services, but we will also be focusing on, decent jobs and green jobs to support employers in this new era. At the end of my presentation, I would just like to say that it's actually not a question on whether you want to focus on employers or the unemployed, because one service cannot exist without the other, so they support each other. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll have an interesting debate later on.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Yeah, really important final message there about the importance of working with both employers and job seekers. And I think really interesting that, as you said at the beginning, that it's not just one practice really that you were talking about there, but a whole system to provide this one-stop shop for employers. So really interesting to hear that. Thank you. So we're getting some questions already in the Q&A box, which is really, really good. We'll come to those after our next presentation. Please do upvote the questions that you want to hear posed, because I'll take the most voted for first, because we might not have time to address them all. Some of them are quite specific. We'll get through as many as we can, but please do upvote the ones that you want to see asked. So now we have our final inspirational PES practice. I'll be handing the floor to Barbara Hellström from the Department for Digital Services in the Swedish PES. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to be hearing about this speed interviews approach that the Swedish PES has been running. Barbara, 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I hope you all see my screen there. So very shortly, I'm the ambassador of digital meetings at the Swedish PES, and the digitizing part of the Swedish PES has gone on for quite some years. And just before the pandemic, in 2020, we formed a mission, because in Sweden, 98% of our citizens have access to internet and a device to use it on. Most of the time it's a smartphone, but also others like computers or tablets. So the Swedish PES formed a mission that said that those who have access to the internet should also have access to our services. And that includes, of course, even the employers. So based on that, I will just talk about one of our. We have a vast portfolio of digital services to both our employers and the job seekers. But I will talk about just one today, and that is speed interviews. I will run through, hopefully quite fast. It will be fast anyway, what it is and how it works. And if we have the time, I would like to. We could talk more about digital events, or we can pick that thread up during the Q&A if you want to. So, in this presentation, you will see side-by-side pictures like this, and on the laptop screen, you will see what the interviewer sees, and on the smartphone screen, you will see what the candidate sees. So bear that in mind throughout the presentation. So, what is speed interviews? Well, it's a unique digital service that Swedish PES offers to our employers in Sweden. It combines video meetings with HR features. And why do we do this? Well, we would like to help them in structuring the interviews and sorting candidates and so on. And it's also very fast and easy to use. And since it's government owned, it's also free of charge. And the name speed interviews comes from the vision we had when we started to develop this one. The first pilot was in 2017, I think, and I joined the Swedish PES in 2018. the mission and the vision they had for the service was that employers should meet during 1 hour. Employers should meet somewhere between one interviewer should meet somewhere between 6 or 7 candidates in short speed interviews that were highly structured. And at the end of the day, when all the interviews were finished, they would get some kind of summary that they could use afterwards. And that's why we wanted it to be structured. So they ask each and every candidate the same questions. So let me move you forward. As I said, it is easy to use, and that means what you see in this page is the self-service view for the employers. So if you want to create a speed interview, you just, let me see if this works with me today. You just hit the button there that says create an interview occasion. And you get into the system and start creating your interview occasion. First of all, you have to give some information about the job opening, like what's the name of the company, what type of job is it, and a short summary of the job. You also have to set a date and a time. In this case, it's set in 21st of October and 1 hour. The second thing you do, you have to add interviewers, and you can have as many interviewers as you want. And I can say in some cases we have up to 10 interviewers in one single meeting because they want to meet somewhere between 60 or 70 candidates in just 1 hour. So it's very time effective for the employers in this case. And the only data that you put into this system is the email address to the name of the interviewer, their email address, and their phone number. So the next part is to define how many candidates you want to interview during this session. In this case, I think I have 4 interviewers, and we agreed on interviewing 25 candidates. And the next part is actually optional, but this is actually the HR features in it. Here you predefine the questions that you want to ask each and every candidate, and you will take notes about that. And you can also predefine some qualities that you are looking for. And remember, this is going to be short, like 5 or 10 minute talks to each and every candidate. So keep it structured to maximize the advantage of these HR features. And the final part of this is hit the save button. And once you hit the save button, it creates a web page. And the web page looks the same for both the interviewers and the candidate. The interviewers, sorry, they log on with I don't know if you saw that, but there is a short PIN code, 4-digit PIN code that they log on with. The candidates enter and register themselves. So when they register, they give their contact information, and that is all. But before you have them there, you need to invite them, of course. And one way of inviting is sending an email. There is a built-in email template in the system, so you can just click that one, and it's pre-written. And you can edit the text if you want to. But what we see here in Sweden is that most of the employers that is using this, they do this speed interview. They create the speed interview first, and then they put the link in a job ad and say, okay, the first step in our recruitment process is to sign up for a speed interview. See you on the 21st of October at 10 o'clock. Register. But they also use it to use in social media or even on websites. And when it comes to websites, the most common part of where you publish this link is when we have digital events or digital recruitment events, job fairs. So, as I said, for the candidate, the only thing they are entering to register is their contact information, their name, their email address, and their telephone number. And there is also one at the bottom here, if you see, there is a one-click deregistration. So if you want to unregister up until the time for the interview, you can always unregister for this. if you don't want to go into this interview with the employer. And by clicking this button, everything is deleted from our servers immediately, the contact information. So there is no records stored at all about you as a candidate. So once the recruiter or the interviewer logs into the system, he will get a list of all the candidates that has signed up for this. And the first one, number 1 there's a little green box there saying online. So he picks the first one that is online at the moment and gives the candidate a call and starts a video call. And the candidate gets a notification and they have 30 seconds to answer. If they don't, it doesn't mean that they lost their option or opportunity. It just means that they will return to that candidate later on during the speed interview. And this is what it looks like. So it's a bit different. And once again, I remind you that the interviewer is on the computer screen and the candidate is on the smartphone. The first thing you see, there is a box there, and that is the HR features. It's embedded in the actual video meeting for the interviewer, where he can ask or she can ask all the questions, and they can check mark all the skills, yes or no, if they have it or not. And sometimes, often, depending on the candidate using a cell phone and might be on a internet connection that is not that well, sometimes they don't get the video running or things like that. There is also an option to chat, where we urge the employers not to spend time on trying to solve technical issues that might be on the candidate side. Just reassure them that we will interview you. Either we leave you here and you try to reconnect, or we will call you because we have your phone number. So we will call you once we are done with all the other interviews. No worries, we will get in touch with you. And as you saw on the picture before, on the slide before, the candidate do not see these questions or anything. It's just the interviewers that sees it. And once they say, okay, thank you, bye-bye, nice talking to you, the interviewer hangs up on this first candidate, and he gets to, or she gets to a summary of the candidate, where he or she can add notes and might also change some question. If they've said yes to something that was actually going to be no, they can still edit that here. And then they get an option at the bottom to say, do I want to proceed with this candidate or not, to the next step in the recruitment process. And in this case, they check mark the yes. And what the candidate gets when he hangs up, he gets a question, are you still interested in this job or not? And this is one of the features that is most appreciated by our employers, because they don't have to, in the next step of the process, recruitment process, go chasing after people that are not interested in working with them. So they focus on the one that they have a match with. So when that you can see. When all the interviews are finished, you can see a summary of all the interviews, and you can also see the status and where there is a match. And by match, in this case, it says it means that both the employer and the candidate has, or the interviewer and the candidate have marked that they want to proceed in the process. And you can also sort this on name or match or whatever it is. So we'll take a fast look at one of the candidates here.
Just, just 1 more minute, if that's all right, Barbara. Just
I'm at the very end of this.
Great,
yeah. There is still an option for them to edit or save any data and notes. And they can also download this summary. And they have to do that within 2 weeks, because after 2 weeks, all the data that has been stored on our servers regarding this interview occasion is deleted. we don't save data that is not necessary to be saved, and this is not that on that part. The actual chat, the chat you saw in the earlier, is only saved 2 hours. So what I would end with is that the platform is safe, and we adhere both to GDPR and Schrems 2. And since it is web-based, you don't have to download any programs or applications, and it's a one-click deregistration, as I told you. And as you saw, this presentation was in English. It is, of course, in Swedish. We developed it in Swedish first, but it's also an interface in English. Our employers in Sweden can use this very successfully when recruiting from other countries. So that was the speed and the speed interview.
Thank you very much indeed, Barbara. Really interesting, very specific practice, and I'm sure very inspirational for people, something that people wouldn't have necessarily thought about doing at all, something really innovative. So it'll be interesting to see what questions we have on that. I think, as I said before, we're going to have another small contribution now from the German PES about their approach to working with employers and account management. I think we're going to be joined by Detlev Wilke-Kohler from the German PES. So Detlev, just 2 or 3 minutes. Please tell us about what you've been doing in the German PES. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I would like to give you a tasty little appetizer to make you hungry. It's almost lunchtime. What is key account management in the world of federal agency? So we gain a service to large entrepreneurs beyond just filling jobs. Especially those with a significant importance for the federal agency, of course. In the economy, the term for those is key account customers, as you know. For them, we are consultants and sparring partners for strategically HR topics. Key accounts are interesting for us if they are innovative and transform the profound processes of the economy in their own venture. For a public authority, we follow the zeitgeist of individual situations and needs of employers. With our holistic perception of key accounts, we generate a new attendance and service. Nevertheless, our activities are based on the social law. We empower with a new perspective on asking questions on the future to retain employability. Some questions might be, how do we work together in the future? How do we produce and act sustainable in the future? How do we manage sustainable HR activities, for example? Or how do work companies together in the futures? The answers of the past are not the answers of the future, because the future is not what it used to be in the past. Therefore, we have to find and formulate questions of the future to be answered in the near future. When we prefer to work in a professional setting, we have to pose good questions, as I said. We are not experts, but challengers. That is what companies like, a partner, a real partner, and someone who understands the business. The world is changing and we have to transform as well. So we are in the middle of the road to how future is working. And our aim is to work with our employers very closely and to be involved as early as possible, especially in the strategic planning process and so on. Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about key account management.
Thank you very much indeed, Detlev, for that additional bonus contribution there from the German PES. And we're going to go straight to the questions now. I'm going to take the most upvoted question first, which is quite handy because it links with the question that I wanted to ask as well. And it's a question for all presenters. And the question, I suppose, is from Christina Muruta, who asks, how do you differentiate your strategy approach when working with different types of employers, particularly comparing micro, small enterprises compared to large companies? And I wanted to just expand that as well and just sort of ask, how do you have certain criteria of employers that you work with, and how do you find them? Do you wait for them to come to you, or are you doing particularly targeted outreach to get to certain types of employers that you've identified that you want to work with? So I'll go to Austria first, perhaps, if you're ready. Just in terms of how do you target employers and how do you distinguish between small and large employers? Thank you.
We do have a key account management for larger companies who are active in whole Austria. And for the others, I would say that the strategy is a lot in the competence of our staff, because the regions are very different. We have Vienna is a big city, and then we have regions with very little companies in the countryside, and the industries are different. So our staff, they can decide how often will they visit a company, and how they organize and how they manage it. And this is important to leave there a lot of freedom to the staff. But of course, we have a controlling. We see how often someone is visit, and we have a lot of numbers. We see how many vacancies is a company giving to us, and how many vacancies we can fill. So we have controlling, but the strategy is within the regional offices, except for the key account management, where we have a central service.
Okay, thank you very much. The same question then to our colleagues from Slovenia.
Yes, well, just like job seekers, also employers like to be treated equally and feel important. I would like to start with that, but we have a segmentation in place in Slovenia. It takes place on two levels. On the level of organization, let me clarify. For instance, in larger cities, we would segment our employer offices in a way that they would specialize for different sectors, But you can also segment your services in a way that you adapt them to different customers. So, for instance, with smaller employers, we would focus on a personal approach. With larger employers, we would focus on digital channels and having more formal cooperation action plans according to their needs, of course. But we have also other ways of segmenting employers. For instance, employers with positive references, employers with negative references. So we would, I would say, focus on those with positive references and really actively approach them and offer additional services you saw before, such as tailor-made programs, speed dating events, job fairs. You would actively promote these services with the employers you would like to, invite into cooperation. So I would say it's a soft way of segmenting employers.
Thank you very much indeed. And Barbara, same question for Sweden.
So it's not my regular job in this, but I can give some input anyway. No, we don't have like cam roles, and we don't give special some employers special treatment in that sense, because we try to handle everybody, as you said, Sandy, equal. But there is something called national agreement with larger companies or larger employers, I would say. It could be another governmental organization also, where we have a team that teams up with a team from their side to move forward in somewhat harder recruitment processes. So for instance, when they are looking for miners in the north of Sweden, we have a shortage of miners. There is a team, one team from either one or several mining companies, and one team from our company or from Swedish PES that work together to find the best way to do it. And often it boils down to digital meetings, and it's not just because I'm an ambassador for, but it boils down to that. As I say, we have services for our employees, and they are already there, that they do the things on demand when they need it with our services. So otherwise, there is not like a cam roll or so.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. So the next question I'm going to take is about, it links to what you were just saying about the digitalization, digital services as well. It's a question from Richard Bezina, who asks about, says, before the pandemic, obviously most services were done through physical interactions. During the pandemic, this has seen a shift of services to online. Now that the pandemic is contained, as he puts it, it's a nice word, should there be a better balance, or perhaps what is your idea of the new balance between the physical and online services? He asks the question, is the shift to online services irreversible? But I guess it's about finding the appropriate balance. Do you have a kind of a vision of that, Barbara? Yeah, you can go first.
Yes. In Sweden, yes, I can say I do, because I usually, when I present speed interviews to employers and so on, I start by looking at just that, because Swedes and the internet. There is a publication that is every year with how the Swedes and the internet and their behavior. So what I start with is that the pandemic did not create this need for digital meetings or digital platforms, so to say. The need was there before. What happened during the pandemic was that it speeded up the adoption of it, and it also it went from being an option to being a necessity. And in some cases, as you probably know, the necessity is still there, and during that necessity period, they found out that this is actually smarter, faster, and more it's better for our organization to do this part digital. So they will continue with some of them digital. But of course, everybody wants to meet everybody. And so there are physical events. What we have seen in Sweden is that the digital recruitment events is more or less an option, the first-hand option for an event, and then they could add a physical event if there's a need for it. Before the pandemic, it was the other way around. It was a physical event which they provided a digital event.
Okay, thank you very much. Slovenia, if you can answer about this new balance between how you see this new balance between digital and physical in terms of the services you're providing.
Well, it's hard to add anything to what has already been said, but of course, we are in a new reality, and we'll never be going back to the things as they were. But I think we'll mainly be seeing hybrid events. So we are really trying to decide when to do a physical, for instance, job fair, when to do a virtual, because there is a big difference if you're looking for IT professionals from all over the world or construction workers in the local area. So we're just, we are moving into a new era of really having a total different service approach to employers and unemployed, based very heavily on digitalization, but still being aware that not everything can go digital, and that we are working also with vulnerable groups. So we are really carefully, let's say, doing this approach. But other than that, it's really hard to say anything else.
Okay, thank you. And colleagues from Austria, same question.
Yeah, for both our customer groups, our job seekers and also the companies, we keep open the personal channel, but it is up to our customers and to our staff to decide, because we also opened up in the crisis the other channels, telephone, online, and written consultations. And as we could see on the one slide, our companies really like the telephone consultation and channel, and but we don't know yet how it finally will develop, because we still have some up and downs and restrictions coming and stopping. So it's maybe too early to say on the long term how this will develop.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take the next question. I'm going to sort of base it largely on what Noah has put in the Q&A box, Noah Oda, about, and I'm going to expand it slightly to talk about, generally speaking, access to these services for people, for vulnerable groups, which could include people with lower levels of digital literacy, but might also involve people with disabilities. In terms of the different practices and systems that you've presented in working with employers, how do you see the ability of those to support the access to jobs for vulnerable groups and employers working with those groups, or indeed, if, for example, the speed interviews, the access for vulnerable groups to those services? I'll change the order a bit. Slovenia, do you want to go first on this one? You're muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Very often I'm asked, well, whether we are just cherry picking, providing services for employers. But I always remember from practice, because I've been working with employers for more than 10 years, that it is a way of opening doors to companies which have never turned to you to hire someone who is disabled, for instance. So when you open these doors, when you establish a partnership, you build up trust, and then you really have the ability to help also the unemployed who are really far away from the labor market. And two practical examples have been presented today, job advocacy and job shadowing. And I'll just give the floor to Živa to answer this part of the question.
Yeah, just elaborate a little bit on our job shadowing event. Actually, we were inspired by a job shadowing event, Do a Day, that was also already took place in the other PESs in Europe. So we were inspired by you. And we wanted to make this happen for a long time. We started the first job shadowing event in October last year, and we didn't do it alone. Actually, we did it with the Chamber of Craft, and we decided that we're going to start small. So we invited only 7 participants, only 7 employers, and but we really wanted to encourage the vulnerable groups to take part in this. So we only selected long-term unemployed to take part in this event. And we were actually really surprised that it got a lot of media coverage. So for the next job shadowing event that we did in February, we had a lot of participants that wanted to take place, but we didn't have so many resources. So we said, okay, we're gonna double it. We had 14 companies and 14 long-term unemployed. And I am very pleased to say that 2 unemployed got the direct employment with the employer. 5 of them started with a PES Slovenia program with the employer. And 3 of them just realized that they had a wrong perception about this occupation that they wanted. So I think it was a very successful event. And I would like to point out that in the future, we are planning more resources so we can make this a very inclusive event. And on the other subject that also Sandy mentioned, we realized that we need to strengthen the advocacy skills of our colleagues first. So we are making a lot of trainings for negotiations, advocacy, so we can really help those who cannot enter the labor market on their own to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're starting to run out of time slightly, but I'll give the floor to the colleagues from Austria and Sweden to answer this same question, and then I'll invite in Maxime Ceruti, who's joined us from Business Europe, for some reflections from him. So Austria, perhaps next on this question about access to jobs of vulnerable groups and how what you've presented responds to that need.
Well, this needs answers on very different levels. On the managerial levels, there is activities in agenda setting and in building up awareness in the society and the companies that it is necessary to also work and take workers that have disabilities and might not fit the image of what companies were expecting in the last years, because we were spoiled with continuous growth of the labor market and workforce, and this situation has changed. So companies really have to change their mindset, and this is one thing that we try to support, to change this mindset, that it is necessary to work with elderly people, with people with disabilities, to open, to change the situation, that to provide part-time jobs, that also women can participate in jobs that has not been the case before. And then also, of course, we promote integration subsidies for vulnerable groups, and we support inclusive job search. That would be some examples, but this question goes more to the service for customers, not so much for the service for employees. And in service for customers, in this process, we have a lot of programs and qualifications that are specialized for vulnerable groups.
Thank you very much. Barbara, from the Swedish perspective?
Yes, it's pretty much the same as for Austria. We have both programs and to offer. But what I would also like to say is that doing something digital within a digital frame often is considered to be a democratic right in Sweden, and that also brings people who would not maybe go to a physical recruitment event because of their vulnerability. They show up in digital events, and they have the opportunity themselves to sign up with an employer that would probably might not contact them or invite them in another way. And of course, there are rules and regulation on how to not to discriminate anyone in Sweden as well. But pretty much less is like the other said. There are programs and special features for those who want to recruit disabled people, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to all of you. I think that wraps up this this particular part of today's webinar. Thank you to our presenters for answering those questions. I would just encourage the three of you that have presented that there are some specific questions for you about your practices. You are able to answer those if it's possible to do in kind of short typed answers. You can go into the Q&A box and type a quick answer. If there's something that you see that you can answer quite quickly and easily that's been addressed to you, I would encourage you to do that so that we can answer even more of people's questions. But as I said, I'm delighted that we've been joined by Maxime Ceruti. Maxime, welcome to the webinar today. We've been hearing these inspiring practices from different public employment services about how they've been working with employers through speed interviews, one-stop shops and telephone conferences and virtual meetings, really looking at how the employers can support PES in recruiting people, including, as we were just discussing, their vulnerable groups, and understanding the labour market better and future skills needs. And now for the next 10 minutes, Maxime, who's just to let everyone know. So Maxime is the Director for Social Affairs at Business Europe. Business Europe, I think most people are aware of, the leading organisation representing European businesses and employers. And for the next 10 minutes, it would be great to hear your perspective, the employer sides, on employers' needs and challenges in Europe and how you see that relationship with public employment services. So Maxime, for 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ed, and thanks a lot to the network for inviting us to be with you this morning. I'm sorry I could not make it in the first part of the meeting, because something else came up that I needed to prioritize. But I'm pleased that we can have this exchange and to have the opportunity to speak to you. I mean, the first thing I want to say is to thank the organizers for putting the issue of cooperation with employers on the agenda. I think it's a very important issue. You all know that we are in a context, and this context is multiple crises I've been going through, and the latest one is still very much ongoing with the war in Ukraine. And when it comes to the implications for this on our labor markets, what is, of course, a key background to all these discussions you are having is that we are facing, as employers, growing labor and skill shortages across Europe. And that means that there is a growth bottleneck that is growing in terms of not being able to respond to the demand, not being able to find enough people, but also people with the right skills in order to help our companies to operate in a good way and to have products and services going to markets, to clients with satisfaction. And that is, of course, a key challenge that is present. So to put a bit in context, you know that in the council there is a body, the employment committee, that is a technical body preparing for the EBSCO meetings. And we had recently an exchange with the representatives of member states in the EMCO committee, which was dedicated to this issue of labor and skills shortages. There was also quite some work done on the analytical level by some research organizations like Eurofound, but also by the European Labour Authority in terms of this issue of labor and skills shortages. But at this point in time, I think we are really at the time when we need to do something more operationally to respond to this challenge. And that's where I think the role of the PES network is very important, because you are just in the middle of it, and your structure and the way you are close to the companies on the local level, but also having some coordination and activities organized in each country on a national level based on priorities that relates to the particular circumstance of a country and having in mind the local realities in different places of your countries, I think it is very crucial now. Because I mean, there was quite some initiatives taken in the past period. For example, EASE, you may remember that, effective access to employment, which was one of the responses to the COVID crisis, and which was an important Commission recommendation. A lot of it is still valid today. So in terms of content, this is good. But when it comes to the actual scaling up of the work in view of this reality I'm depicting of growing labor and skill shortages, and this is across sectors, it is across occupations and skills. So the challenge is very lively at different levels. But of course, when we go into more details, we can see that there are effects of different crises and there are structural issues. For example, the fact that we are missing people with IT skills is something that is a structural issue. And it is true both for the very highly skilled, where we need to have professionals on a high end with advanced IT skills, having in mind also the interconnection with different art skills, engineering, and in terms of being able to use technology and internet and being able to sell to the customer orientation is of course very important. So all this also means that there is a structural shift in terms of what kind of skills are being expected in the jobs as they are changing. But the IT skills challenge is rather a structural one. If we look at the COVID crisis, of course, all these sectors that were very impacted, like the care sector and the hospitality sector or aviation sector, they are in a very specific situation now. I mean, in the care sector is because there are important shortages. People have been working hard during the period. And of course, it means that now there is a bit less people present and some shortages that also relate to this crisis and the consequences of it. Whereas in some other sectors, it's rather because they had to shut down to a good extent. So the airports, the aviation sector, they were not operating as airline companies to the same extent. And so it means that quite many people are not there anymore, and big challenges to find the people that are needed now that the activity is picking up. Similarly, for the hospitality sector, when the restaurants and hotels have been on a very low activity during COVID due to sanitary measures, now they face very big challenges in finding the people that they need in order to do the summer period and face all this demand that is coming up. So, I mean, this is another, of course, entering point. And when we look at the very recent past, it's going without saying that all the difficulties in sourcing raw materials and the supply chains impacts of what is going on in Ukraine on the companies and the operations in Europe and globally through the various production sites is something that is a concern, and that goes in several sectors, manufacturing, of course, being part of it. But we are, at a time when there are impacts and when it's challenging to produce in view of the consequences of the war. On the other hand, we also have this very significant wave of refugees that have been coming from Ukraine, mainly women, a lot of children, and that means that the employability of these people cannot be overestimated. But on the other hand, probably some good potential in order to cope with some of these extra difficulties I was speaking about for some of the sectors, like hospitality sector, and being able for the employers in those sectors to have access to some workforce as they need it. But of course, with the challenges of language and welcoming the people, and also the other challenge that we don't know how many of them are going to remain. I think it's already close to 6 million people that came in, but when we are looking into their motivation, many of them, they want to return to Ukraine as soon as it will be possible, and some already do. So it's a question mark how many and what is really the potential. But of course, we need to be open, and we have been as Europeans, and I think it was a rather good response to it. But
just,
I mean,
1 minute, 1 minute, if that's okay, Maxime.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I'm going to conclude with some keywords on the actual work that you do as PES. So, I mean, first, I think it's important that you're need-based and that you are service-oriented to the companies. Your practices, as it was discussed this morning, goes in this direction, and so encouraging you to go further in this direction, to exchange practices, to improve based on those that are the best performing systems on connections with the employers. I think in your work, it's important that you have options and solutions to propose to the employers. And in this, there is, of course, the need for having more of the unutilized domestic workforce brought to the labor markets. We highlight very much in the policy debate these days the role of in-work benefits to have more people coming to the labor markets of the inactive populations. But it is also, of course, about the European mobility and about the international mobilities. So, as you know, there is in Europe a single market, people can move freely. But there are also some interesting tools like the Recognition of Professional Qualifications Directive. And I think at this point, we need to identify where are the shortages, most acute ones in terms of jobs and skills, and try to focus on these shortages, improve mobilities where we can in the European context, and of course, globally with the talent pool that DG Home is working on. I think there is a lot of potential to have more people coming from outside Europe with the skills that we need in Europe, and therefore having a positive economic migration policy framework developing in the coming years. One last word, perhaps, to highlight that in your solutions that you can propose to employers, you of course need to cooperate with others. And I will highlight 3 important actors to work with. Social service providers in terms of inclusion, but it is of course very important that there is an employment focus and an employment orientation of those social services to bring the people closer to the labor markets. Working with the private employment services and the companies that are operating in the field, complementarities can be built. I think it's much better to work on cooperation rather than competition, and trying to really have good outcomes all together, being open to the public and private at the same time, focus on employment, of course, and better connections, better matching jobs and skills. And the last one is, of course, training providers. I think there are debates now on minimum income schemes in the European context. It's important to have a focus on skills so that the people who are vulnerable are going to have relevant skills and being supported for that. And of course, when it comes to the unemployed and the inactive, the public employment services play a key role. So thanks a lot for your attention. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm here to respond to some questions if any of you would like to ask me anything. And thanks for your work. I'm quite impressed by the network. I see that there is more than 160 people participating today. I think it's valuable, and I think we should further build on it. So on our side, we are all for cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maxime, for those positive words and sharing your thoughts from the employment perspective. Really interesting contribution. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions because we have to wrap up in the next few minutes. Just before I hand the floor to Elodie from the PES Network Secretariat for some concluding words, we need to launch a poll just to get your feedback. I think there are just 8 questions, just so you can, hopefully that's popped up on your screen. You just take 30 seconds to quickly tick the boxes. It helps us design the future webinars. Okay, so if you're hopefully nearly done that, I've seen that our contributors have been busy typing answers to some of the questions in the Q&A. So thank you also for that. Well, we are running out of time. We just have a few minutes left. So I'll now, as I say, hand the floor to Elodie Fazi, PES Network Secretariat, for some concluding words. Elodie.
Many thanks, Ed. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for, I think, a very inspiring session with lots of innovative ideas, and also in particular to our speakers who've been working during the session and afterwards. It's clearly a topic where there's a lot going on in the different PES and in the network as well. And today we heard from countries really that made it a priority to change their approach in supporting employers. In some countries, it's a process that started a very long time ago. We heard about Slovenia, but clearly this has accelerated over the last years. We heard about different delivery models, about different tools, from one-stop shop to specialized counselors. We heard about on-site and online services. But my feeling is that in all these cases, it was very clear that these approaches belong to an overall strategy and a broader menu of activities. It was also quite clear that cooperation with employer organizations, with chambers in a structured way is also very important to operationalize this support. We also heard that proactive outreach is really important, and that the personal relationships really remain extremely important even in a digitalized world. It was quite clear from all the practices that innovation was brought about during the pandemic, but it really has had lasting effect after that. In some cases, it really helped to support employers via simpler and simplification of administrative work and easier procedures. It was also quite clear that PES are operating in a new context that has changed really tremendously. We heard about the new economic context as a real game changer. The unemployment rate is really the lowest for many, many years at 6.2%. But there are new tensions on the labor market and skills shortages. Many of you actually commented also on the relationship with employers, which has been changing. For example, attractiveness, the question of attractiveness is increasingly into the focus with new advisory services to attract and retain employees. So it's not only about matching, it's really about dealing with all those other questions. We also heard about the question of diversity that is even more important in the current context, and to really maybe challenge the traditional mindset when it comes to access of vulnerable groups. Clearly, all this might even accelerate, and one of you said that we are in the middle of the road to the future. So I think that was pretty clear from most of your interventions. So how do we take it from there? It's an issue we will come back to as a PES network, and I think we heard really a lot of pointers for our future work and partnership. So what I can promise you is that we will take it further also in our discussion with the chair and when developing the work program for next year. I would just like to thank by apologizing because it's raining a lot all of a sudden outside. So I hope you could hear me clearly. But I would like to really thank all the speakers from Austria, Slovenia, Sweden, Germany, also from Business Europe. I think you really brought a lot of insightful contributions. And clearly, we will come back to this issue very soon. So, Ed, the floor is yours. And also, sorry, thanks to Chiara also for organizing, to Hilde in the Secretariat, and obviously to you, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Elodie. Nothing to add to those brilliant closing words, very clear conclusion to today's excellent webinar. Just thank you again to the contributors. A couple of practical questions people asked about recording and the presentations. You will receive a thank you email following up this webinar, which will give you a link to the recording, make that available to you. If you are part of the PES network, you'll be able to access all the presentations via the Circ ABC space. If, when I say Circ ABC, you have no idea what I'm talking about, that means that you're probably not going to access it through there. And you can actually write to us and request copies of the presentations. So when you get your thank you mail from the PES network email address, if you'd like to have a copy of the presentations, please just write back to us and we can send those to you. And that is, yeah, it's just been posted in the chat, but you can reply to the thank you message. So thank you very much to everyone. We finished more or less on time. Really interesting discussions, and as Elodie said, something, and Maxime as well, something that we'll be following up on as a network into the future. So have a great rest of the day, and I hope it's not raining as hard where you are as it is now in Brussels, as Elodie mentioned. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.